Well, needless to say, I'm very happy to be back here at Fullerton and to know that your program got extended or a new lease on life. As far as I know, this is one of the few programs of this kind in the country, isn't it? Where Chicanos are. There's another one? This is the only one. And I had very good experiences with last year's program when you were able to come out and document with the purpose of conserving and collecting contemporary history or history in the making, some of the marches against the immigration policies of deportation and the laws, some of the marches to Free Los Tres, some of the demonstrations where people were invited to come to rap and to rally our people against particular injustices, as well as other, I think, important happenings in our community that could serve to explain the history of this moment to students or to community people later on. And I was very disturbed to hear at first this summer that the program had been terminated, or at least temporarily so, but now that you assure me it's going to go on, I'm very happy to hear it. One of the things that I had been thinking about when I was told about your program here is the fact that one of the reasons that the dominant segment in this society, those who have the money and control the institutions, have been able to get away with in terms of keeping us Chicanos and, of course, other minority peoples deprived and in a insecure position, has been the fact that access to documentation about even our own selves, to collection, conservation, and reproduction of our own data has been wholesale denied to us on a wholesale basis. For instance, let me just give you an example that I came across, and I'm sure you who are studying library sciences or are going for library majors have many others. But 2 years ago, I happened to be invited to Yale on some kind of a program where they were trying to bring together speakers from the various minority groups. And the program there was to visit Yale for 3 days and meet with the various department heads and the various facility staffs and see how the departments and the units that comprise, or the components that comprise the University of Yale or Yale University were relating or not relating to the particular minority group. And one of the places that I was taken, and I surprisingly enough found a lot of interest, and of all places, was the library. They had just finished a brand new library that cost them I don't know how many millions of dollars, but it is just the physical plant is very imposing. It's built in the middle of a lake, of a pool of water, huge pool of water, and the vaults go down 4 or 5 stories into basements, and this is where they conserve all the very important data prior to annotating and documentation and becoming enumerated or stockpiled or inventoried, as they call it. The control in and out is fantastic. It's got all kinds of, well, they control the ingress and egress of material and people better than the airline companies control passengers, you know, for concealed weapons and so forth. You cannot take any kind of a notebook into the library. You cannot take coats. You have to check everything in, and then when you leave, you pass through control gates, and then you pick up your wardrobe, overcoat or raincoat or notebooks and so forth. The reason for it is that the collection there, or there are various collections, are worth literally hundreds of millions of dollars. And the building is made for posterity, like Egyptian pyramids or the vaults of kings, you know. It's built to withstand atomic attack. I think it could stand a direct hit. It goes so far down, and then it's in water, and it's got floating foundations and so forth. But the reason that I wanted to tell you this story is to tell you that there at Yale sits the Western Americana historical and document collection owned by two brothers. I think you could find it in the materials here in the library, the Western Americana collection at Yale. The money was allocated some 100 years ago by two brothers, two businessmen, and they began first to collect material dealing with the western frontier, the arrival of people and the organization of cities and schools and churches and so forth up to the Mississippi River, and then on into the Missouri Territory, the Louisiana Purchase, and then into the West and the Southwest. But what should be of particular interest to us is that they came into the Southwest and they bought up the entire records of every town that they could get a hold of, the entire municipal or council or governmental unit record of every Spanish and Mexican town in the Texas Territory and then the Southwest. Whole archives are there. Not only did they get all that, but they got as much of Indian collector's items, documents. As you know, much of the Indian material was done on bark and on leather and on deer skin and so forth. Well, they got all that too. Any kind of literary communication or annotating material that could have been used, rocks and so forth, they bought and they have it there. But even so, they were not content to get all that. They had been buying after 1835 in Texas and after 1848 in the other southwestern states. They had been buying all the collections of the remaining towns, anything that they could get a hold of, dealing with the existence of Mexican people, Indian people, Spanish people, before and after 1835 in Texas and 1848 in the other states. They own it. Any company going out of business, any mine going out of business that had records, companies store records, records of employees and so forth. And on top of that, the final straw that really breaks the camel's back here is that they have been going into Mexico and buying up the entire records of whole towns, municipios, distritos, and states. Any Mexican archive director that wanted to peddle or has wanted to peddle, they would buy. And you know, you just it makes your heart bleed because you see very important material in their hands. And they have it in one of their basements. It occupies maybe a quarter of an acre of shelves. And it would probably, they say, will take them maybe 50 years to organize it all and get it out so that it can be viewed. And the lists already, I think, occupy two very large volumes about the size of an Encyclopedia Britannica. I'm sure you have the listings of that collection, Western Americana collection at Yale. And they asked me if I wanted to look through some of the material, and I did. I looked at some of the material they picked up out of Texas, and I could see readily why there are so many gaps, you know, in our own history. People from Texas of Mexican origin that were born in all these towns that we know must have had and should have had historical data dealing with what our people were doing, who they were. They bought up all the newspaper files of newspapers that were printed in that epoch, church files. And I can see why so many Catholic people that have wanted to trace their ancestry 2 or 3 or 4 generations back were unable to do so because these ferrets, these buyers, you know, for the Western Americana just go into these towns, and they know what they're after. I'm sure that they give a degree there at Yale on how to collect Western Americana, because they go through those areas with a fine-tooth comb. And I guess through library associations, they know how to buy it. They put out bids, and they alert everybody in that region what they're looking for, and that they're willing to pay a price, and that's how they get it, because it's there. It's there. Parishes that were terminated, missionary orders that worked for a few years amongst migrants or in areas that were not, very, very permanently settled. They wound up with this material. Anything that the diocese did not take over when these parishes closed was picked up by them. They have everything. It's unbelievable what they have. And some time back, some people asked me, where should Chicanos go to get documentation, say hard evidence in terms of tracing the lives of important Mexican or Chicano people of that period, because they had gone to look at newspaper records, and of course in the period between 1835 and 1900, those little newspapers and magazines and publications had very short lives. They're not like the St. Louis Post-Dispatch or the New York Times that they conserved every single issue. No. They were little operations by a small-town editor. Maybe he printed 2, 3, or 4 years, and then he moved on, or he sold it, and somebody else bought it, and these archives wound up in boxes, and then only those who would have a particular interest in that field, in that area of that time, would be aware that this material was around, and of course this collection has bought it up. And many people have tried to find out about their grandparents or great-grandparents, as I've told you, in company store records, in the mining towns, railroad towns, and in the closed-down parishes, and they have been told by the successors of those corporations that the records don't exist, that they can't find the books, or they've been told by the diocese of the particular area that they don't have the records for that parish. And the reason being, of course, that these collectors have them. Now, can you imagine it's going to take them 50 years? See, so the only way you can get access is for you to have enough money to go to Yale for 2 or 3 years and go in there every day. And the gentleman in charge is a fine enough old gent, he understands, but he's a product of the whole process. He says, we feel very guilty that we have all this material here. But at the same time, we feel we're very fortunate, because if we didn't have it here, God knows where it would be. It would be out there being pilfered and being disarrayed and being open for just eroding and total loss through misuse or through neglect. So he says, I'm glad, and then I feel badly about it. But it's here, and any of our students who want to work on it and so forth can do so. So that's just as a way of, or a method of getting across this point that what you have here is just barely the common seed, size opening to what should be a huge boulder. And really, we have just the beginning. But it's important that you have the beginning to gather and to insist that money be given to collect and to organize for posterity this material. And it has not been just by accident that we don't have our own collections, or that no one has cared to collect them in the Southwest. It has been premeditated. They didn't care about us, and they didn't want to care, and they didn't want posterity to care, and they didn't want them to know or to get at the truth. They didn't want us to get at the truth about our history, and they didn't want their own progeny, their own future sons, daughters, and future generations to know about us. They really wanted to hide, destroy, and hopefully forget who we were and what actually took place. So maybe in that light, we should be thankful that this Western Americana collection does exist. At least we can go over there and sit down and go through it. I was particularly distressed with what they were doing in Mexico, collecting all these records, because Mexico should not permit this material to leave, you know. And they're getting material right up to about Cardenas's time, to 10, 15 years ago. And how they permit that to leave is really a mystery to me. Now, so much for that. I hope that one of the things that can be studied here at this project is to begin to develop a position or a concept or a theory of how to restore all these gaps that exist in our history. Who did this to us? Who might have had an interest in carrying it off? And why did they do it? And where can we patch it all up and put it together? As you know, in Spain, the Catholic Church, and in Austria, and in Belgium, and France, London, they have tremendous collections of pre-Columbian material dealing with not only Mexico, but, you know, Central America, South America, and so forth. Carefully collected, carefully documented, and have been made available to scholars for many years. That's why it is so much easier to document the rich cultural and social heritage of the native peoples of the Americas, from Mexico on down, than it is to document, you know, the modern history of Chicanos in the Southwest. See, because they did carry it off, but at least they painstakingly and very rapidly, you know, put it out so that it could be studied, and so that we could be able to point with pride and with easy documentation to the great civilizations that were developed and built by our ancestors. But we cannot say that of the period in, say, starting with 1800 and on forward in the Southwest. We have very little, and there was a lot. So maybe in a project such as this, you could develop your own theory of how all this material has filtered through our fingers and has been disposed of purposely, sold out, or neglected, or forgotten, and how much of it can be or should be recovered. I'm sure that a lot of it can be recovered, and efforts could be made to do it on a scientifically and as organized a basis as is possible. It's got to be done. One of the best ways to document the history of a people is not to go to the books that are already written, because if you're not satisfied with what you have found to be your own, the history of your own people, you have become satisfied because the books you have read or you have found leave much to be desired. And I think that's the case with our situation. I think that we know what has happened to us, that we have been the victims of the total distortion and omission of our own history by those who have written it. And they have done it in a very premeditated manner. So if you're unhappy with the written history and you find that it does very little to restore a sense of dignity and a pride of identity and so forth, then you're on the right track. Because all people on the face of the earth have proven and can document the fact that they should be very proud of their own identity. Everybody. There isn't a single group of or race of people, ethnic group, that has a so-called bad history. There's no such thing. See, mankind has been very creative. Mankind has been extremely fertile and extremely positive in what they have left behind and what they have done. You see, you could go to the Aborigines, because there has been a human process of development, and it has always been for the better. It's always been dealing with adverse conditions and conquering them. Each group of peoples has come upon given stages of development at different times, but the human process has been pretty uniform and pretty general. So we should not be afraid. In fact, we should insist that we be given the opportunity to put it together and find it. And when it doesn't exist, then we know something is wrong. That's the point I'm trying to make. And for us, for that period, I would presume that newspapers and publications would be the best source. I would presume, I'm not sure. Not the only source. For instance, the same group of young people that were studying it at Yale 2 and 3 years ago got the university there to fund them to come to Los Angeles for a summer to do some research on contemporary history. And they came to Los Angeles and spent a few weeks taping people and interviewing and pinpointing sources. And then they wanted to do some original work, and so they decided that they wanted to look through radical publications to see what the radical publications in the last 50 years had said about Chicanos. And so we sat down and we pinpointed 3 radical publications that we could get our hands on. One, the records of the People's World, which is a communist newspaper in the West Coast. And the paper out of which the People's World grew out of, which was called the Western Worker. And they have a complete file in San Francisco at the offices of the People's World. And then the other 2 radical papers were the Maritime, the Voice of the Federation. The Voice of the Federation being the organ of the Maritime Federation of the Pacific. This was a federation of radical West Coast unions that was formed in the 30s. And then, of course, the other one was the ILWU Dispatcher, or the organ of the Longshoremen's Union. There are many others that we could have gotten, but we chose those 4. And so we went to the offices in San Francisco, the People's World, and they let us have every copy of the Western Worker. And so we very dutifully sat down for several days, and we read every paper, page by page, and tried to find any reference to Spanish surnames or any reference to strikes or situations dealing with issues where Spanish surname might be involved in the San Joaquin Valley in Northern California. We found very unusual stuff. For instance, that Mexicans were involved in strikes up in Alaska, in the Pacific, in the inland passage of the Canadian Alaskan waters, in the canneries, in the fisheries, in the logging camps and mining strikes, well, you name it. So we took down page and a reference note. We came out with a pretty good list. Then we went through all the issues of the People's World, and we uncovered, of course, some of the happenings of that period that we had forgotten, like the Preston School issue. You remember when these Mexican kids hung themselves because the treatment was so bad. It was very well documented there. You know, Preston School is here in Norwalk, isn't it? Or something, in Whittier. It was called Preston at that time, and the community got up in arms and organized itself and forced the resignation of all the staff of the Preston School, and they had to name a whole new superintendent of corrections for youth and so on and so forth. The community really did a pretty good organizing job, and that was in the early 30s when it took place. We discovered it there. Some of us had heard and known about it, but we'd forgotten it. But it was one of the big issues, along with the Sleepy Lagoon case and the Suit Suit riots, that belong in our history. Anyway, we did this in those papers. We found Mexican seamen involved in strikes and organizing and explosions on ships at sea, and all, you know, the kind of stuff that would appear in these magazines and papers. So then the young people went back to Yale, and they showed this stuff to the director of library services there. Well, next year he just allocated enough money to microfilm the entire collection. You know, in other words, he just contracted with the People's World to microfilm all their documents, every issue they'd ever printed, to microfilm the LW Dispatcher, to microfilm the Voice of the Federation. You see the kind of money there is? And here these youngsters, you know, could have saved themselves and saved us. We enjoyed it, but here we go, we're doing it the hard way. you know, we're doing it, pulling our own plow, and these guys got the money. They said, well, if you're, you know, when they're really interested in getting something, they just contract with, I don't know, some photo lab or somebody like that. And so go and microfilm every issue of this newspaper that has been printing for 30 years. You see the kind of resources and the kind of interest when they place enough value and priorities upon a given subject. And we don't have that at our disposal, but we should. And maybe something can be done out of this project that besides training people, and it's very important to go and pursue the whole question of documentation and the discovery of sources and so forth. I think that's very important. But I think it's also very important to come out with some basic concepts about what is wrong with the whole area of library science and librarianship in Chicanos. This is just a couple of experiences that I can share with you. The other experience that I wanted to deal with is this whole area of collecting of Chicano materials. At Yale's new library, this little old man who runs the Western Americana collection was very proud to show me that he was beginning to collect Chicano materials. So he takes me, you know, to a huge department of empty shelves, and he's got, you know, he's got acres and acres of shelves, and he's got a little section about so big. And he lifts out 2 copies of El Malcriado, 2 or 3 posters of Viva la Huelga, and a few leaflets. And he was very proud. He said that he sent Cesar Chavez $500 as a donation, and asked him in return, could he send him some visual material, some documentary material that he could put in his now, you know, Chicano collection department. And he had very little, see. I didn't want to encourage him too much because I figured this guy is liable to get another idea and go in there and buy up something that should remain in our hands, you know. But, okay, it shows you, you know, that there is this interest. And then he showed me, I asked him about black, and they have tremendous amounts of material on blacks at Yale. The other experience that I had with collecting was at the University of Illinois. The library there set up a fund in 1967 to collect Chicano materials. And the first thing they did, they began to use money to subscribe to anything that would deal with Chicanos, magazines, newspapers, and so forth, buy up issues or back issues, and to begin to accumulate a library. And the way they do it, I guess you know more about this than I do, but I had a chance to visit the University of Illinois a year after they had started, and he showed me a lot of rare books. He was very, very proud. It seems that there are organizations that all they do is look up and find rare books, finders organizations. And in that 1 year, already he had something like 80 original copies of publications, of books that were out of print and were out of the original edition. And he told me, so some we pay $3.50 or $1, some will pay as much as $35, $50. We don't care. You know, if it's within the dictates of the program of accumulation of collecting, we buy it. And you know, well, they know how to do it. They advertise all over the world, and they get them. And already he had some very important material. Now we're talking about old books and periodicals, but they did receive some important sum so that they could collect contemporary material, records, leaflets, tapes of programs. He had enough money so that if he knew that there was a program done by CBS or NBC or a local station or National Education TV and so forth, that he would order a copy. Order a copy of the tape, or order a copy of the film or of the program for educational purposes. And so you should know that this stuff is going on, and that we should fight for it, and we should fight for it in such a way that we should get those collections in the Southwest. The only other place that I know that something like this has been going on has been UCLA. where they've been trying to accumulate, you know, in their own way. But what has happened there, this is what the guys have told me, is that they accumulate very rapidly, but they lose. They get pilfered to death by many of our so-called scholars that go in there, you know, and put the material in their clothes and go out with it. Much of the original material for north from Mexico has been pilfered out of there, and it's found its way to other places, you know, and it's a shame. So I would plead that within the program, if you have the time, that papers or projects could be worked up whereby the California State University system should be urged, or a demand be placed before them to allocate funds to set up a program of accumulation, collection, and you know, preservation of original data dealing with us. I don't know if there is such a program going in the state universities and colleges, but they have the money, and we are an important segment of the population. They are doing it for many other groups, and other state college systems have done it for other groups. And I'm not talking just about ethnic groups. They're doing it for farmers, and they're doing it for people in industry and the professions and so forth. And why shouldn't they do it for 18 or 20% of the population, which is what we constitute here? So these are just some of the thoughts that I had in terms of sharing them with you. I know that when we start out talking about library work and documentation, that the first thing we're impelled to do is to try and find where original material exists and collecting it, you know, and accumulating it. But unless, and fine, that's good. I think that's important whenever we see it. But unless we begin to think about the overall piece of pie, is that we could wind up like a bunch of ants collecting material, you know, and they come in with bulldozers, and they come in with these huge nets, and they pick everything up and sift it out, and here we are, we're plugging away like two squirrels trying to pump a huge motor, you know. And they come in and take it wholesale, and we're out there doing it with a toothpick, see. Because that's where this game is at, unfortunately. When I saw that thing at Yale, you know, then the immensity of it just made me feel, you know, that small. My God, where have we been? You know, the vastness and the thoroughness that they could go into a whole state and say, we're going to allocate so many millions of dollars to buy every single piece of relevant data dealing with this period. See, mainly paperwork. You know, we're not talking about furniture, artifacts, but the printed or pictorial material. And unless we can begin to think, we cannot get the private fortunes that they have to do this, but we must develop the political pressure to get the public monies allocated to do this. You know, no one else has the resources. We are going to have to say this and put the pressure through your department and begin to talk in the real game of librarianship. You know, where and I think that they cannot fight you when you talk about this, because this is the way they're thinking. You know, anyone who has put together a big library collection, he's always been dealing way up there in all the big figures and with the completeness of his project and the depth and breadth of his project, and he's talking about we're going to wind up with a $100 million collection, and we're just going to raise the first $1 million now. You know, that's how they plan it, see? And they work at it 20 years, and maybe in 20 years they got up to 30 million, and they leave it for others to continue and continue and continue. And it seems to me that that's how we've got to view this field. So that's been my experience, which is limited in this sense, you know, with this whole area of librarianship and library sciences. I know that one thing I wanted to share with you before I close. Once in 1967 or 68, I was invited to, what is it, the American Association of Librarians. Is that it? They had the convention in San Francisco, and one of the Kennedy brothers-in-law was in charge of the program, and so he invited several of us to speak before the convention, and I was surprised, you know, how much interest and how far out and how knowing the librarian field, or the professionals in the field of librarianship, were about the Chicano movement. They were more sympathetic, they were more knowledgeable, and they were more with it than teachers, than educators as such, or research people. For what reason, I've never been able to figure out. But we rapped very, very strong and very, very heavy, and then they had a workshop discussion, and there was no opposition to what we were demanding or saying. Many of these people were very familiar, and they understood and so forth. So there's a reservoir of understanding, and I don't think that you're going to run into too much opposition until you begin to demand maybe too much of their budget. And then they're going to say, now wait a minute, you know, we let you in the back door, and now you want to plant yourself right in the front end and take over the whole thing. You know? But that was the experience I had with these librarians, and it was very, very pleasantly surprising to us that they were this favorably, how shall I say, oriented to us and knowledgeable. Did you want to have some questions or discussion?
Yeah, if anybody has questions, I think it'd be a good time to bring them up. I'm interested, I feel, in the comment that you made now that you were closing, the idea that at that time the American Library Association was sympathetic. I think at that time they were beginning to feel the pressure of organizations that had started to form themselves within ALA. But I think that in the last two conferences that I've had, while they showed their sympathy, there hasn't really been that much action. And that's what always disturbs me, you know. I've got the feeling that maybe it is the numbers that as we begin to increase within the profession, that maybe some of these pressures will come to bear. I don't know. But it's just kind of a comment to go along with that. I wonder if anybody here has, Joyce, for instance, I think you might throw some light on it in terms of...
I think one thing, the problem with librarians is that many librarians are rather, not all, of course, but many are farsighted and sympathetic to a lot of things, but librarians don't have any power. They are the tools of the local money managers, and they have to get along with the people that have the money, no matter what they would like to do, and it's very difficult to do what they'd like to do. And lots of librarians have really great ideas and no power to implement them, and which is, you know, frustrating. And maybe as you get more Chicano librarians, then we will have a group that says, now we need some power.
Yes. You know, in 1964, we came upon, we discovered, the Chicanos there in Oakland, we had a unity council of organizations, and that enabled us to divide the labor of carrying on the work of the unity council. So we were very fortunate at that time. We had 2 or 3 professors in the Bay Area that were very interested in working with this Chicano Unity Council. And one of them was Dr. Manuel Guerra, who was a teacher of Spanish there at UC Berkeley. Anyway, he was always doing research on Spanish and the Spanish of the Southwest and so forth. And of course, the Oakland Library, you know, has the entire, they have the Jack London collection because he lived there in Oakland, you know, and he was the local roustabout. And so on the 3rd floor, they have this whole section dedicated to everything that Jack London ever wrote or did and so forth. And they had a little old lady at that time, she must have been about 80, who had known Jack London, and she was in charge of the collection. So Manuel was up there one time getting material because Jack London wrote a lot of stuff on Mexico and Mexicans. You know, he was down in El Paso during the Revolution. He wrote the famous book, The Fighter, the story of Joe Rivers, of the boxer who had been with Pancho Villa and so forth. Anyway, he was interested in digging this material up, and in working in and around the library, he came he came about, or he came across a document that said that the Oakland Library had asked the California State Library Department of Libraries for a grant of $1,200 to be applied for more acquisition and more work to the Jack London collection. And so being a pretty live cat, Dr. Garrett wrote all this information down, and then we had it at the Unity Council, and we wrote her a letter. I forgot her name now, but it was a woman who was in charge of this department, and wrote her a letter asking her if it was possible for other groups other than libraries to get money to do the same thing, or was it possible to get money for augmenting the Spanish and the Mexican collection that they had at the library. At one time it had been very important and had been pilfered away. And many of the books, better books, had been taken out. And surprisingly enough, I forgot what her name was. I think her name was Conley. Is she still? Huh?
Crockett's just been
Oh, is she?
last 3 years.
Was there a lady by the name of Conley before? Mary Conley. Yes, and so we wrote her a letter, and she wrote us back that they had just received, I don't know how many millions of dollars from the first poverty program, and that they were looking for grants to make. So, but that they would have to make them through established libraries. So then we went to see the local librarian, Bill Brock or something like that. I forgot what his name was. Anyway, we went to see him. And he was an unusual sort of a fellow. He was extremely finicky and extremely cautious and extremely conservative. And first of all, he didn't know, he had never been accosted by a group of public citizens other than donors or benefactors, but not people, who came to ask him for something rather than to give him something. And so he was very ill at ease, and we had a meeting there with him, and he wanted to know where we were coming from and so forth. And he says, yes, I'm aware of this. And he says, we have to be very, very careful how we approach the state libraries department. And, he put it all uptight to us. But we went along with this man and wrote up the proposal. And he wrote it up for $3,345, see? And, we spent days and days in this proposal. And we sent it to Mrs. Conley, and Mrs. Conley endorsed it and sent it to Washington. And we knew what came from Washington. The answer said, if you will write it for $330,000, for $330,450, we will consider it. And poor Mr. Bill Brock, he damn near passed on to another life. When he got that, he couldn't believe it, and he called us, and he could hardly talk. He says, we're going to have to the first thing we're going to have to do is find out this is not a typographical error, Mr. Corona. He says, I really believe that the decimal point has been moved over two digits or 1 digit, and so I said, no, let's just take them on their word, and let's just answer them that a proposal covering this amount will be forthcoming, and we acknowledge receipt and so on and so forth. And, he says, I don't want to be deceitful and so on and so forth, Anyway, we did send this letter, and the letter came back acknowledging that they were ready to receive, for $325,000. And we sent it in, and we got $325,000 for a Mexican American library, and to operate 3 years and to train 3 people, and it now operates in the Mexican community there on Fruitvale. It's been going on now for 8 years, I guess. And they had money to build the facility, or to remodel the facility, collect records, to have vans, and to have tape equipment and TV equipment. They collected all sorts of other things besides books. But it's a real functioning operation, and it was a 3-year project, and they have been funded over and over again. So, yes, what you say is true about librarians being really the product of what the system does to them. And I think that we have to be organized to really approach this matter.
I think this matter of writing proposals is really important. I think there's money out there, and people know tried to interest Mrs. Banks in having a class here in how to write proposals and what else can work it in. And I took a class at the UCLA Extension Library School, and I turned it in there to actually have a class on how to write a proposal, because it's a whole different way of thinking and a whole different way of writing things, and it's very important that you do it the way that appeals to them.
Yes.
And I hope someday maybe we can learn how to do this, because there are funds there if you know how to get them.
Yes. Well, the basis for getting this money was that Mexican people did not go to the libraries, that they felt that they were alien to them, that the atmosphere was not receptive, that they didn't have an outthrust that really, or an outreach that really, you know, made Mexican people feel that they were part of this operation, that the staff was not trained or was not the kind of staff that was needed. And so in the proposal, of course, you have to go through the rules of the Library Association. We had to get a professional trained librarian. We had to compromise with that. And she was not Spanish speaking, but she took then a trainee under her wing, and the proposal read that at the end of the 3 years, the trainee would replace her. And then that we would have 2 so-called indigenous workers out of the local community that would be trained in library programming and services. And that's how we got it. We just, and the library department there in Oakland could not you know, deny the fact that very few Mexican people were going to make use of it. See, that there was a failure to have equity in the use of the resources. And of course, you know, the usual answer is, well, the services are here if these people want to use it. But that's not the answer. The answer is not that the services are here, but how are the services presented? You know, we could also have services for non-Spanish speaking citizens in such a way that they would never be attracted. You know, the shoe could be put on the other foot. So you have to really be very hard about your position, and we had problems finally getting it through, but I can tell you that the thing that carried us on through to finally getting it was that we were very stubborn about it. You know, we were just very stubborn. And we just said, you know, this is the way we want it, and we'll make some compromises, but we want, you know, eventually to have our own library here, run by people that understand the community, that come out of the community, and that are trained for servicing this community, not trained for libraries in the general abstract sense. And oh, they send out people from Washington and from Sacramento. I think it was out of the State Library Services Act. Is that the act? And but this Mary Connolly was supportive. She was very, you know, she was not a stumbling block. We had more problems with the local librarian, who felt that his position was threatened somehow, you know. And yes.
Is it part of the Latin American library?
Yes, in the Fruitville district. Yes.
They have a clínica en la raza.
Right there in that whole complex. Yes. Well, that's how that came about. You know, just by an accident, somebody tripping over. You know, we had been so out of it. We didn't know there was such a department. We didn't know that there was money. And then when they wrote us back and saying that we should write it for 3 years and write it for $330,000.
What's nice about it is that it's used by Latinos.
Right.
And, you know, you get a good view into
Mhm.
inside too.
And we had a lot of fights with them over the purchase of the first books. They went to Spain.
Yeah.
They went to Spain and they went to Mexico for the first books. And then they went to conservative editorials, to Argentina. And much of the first monies allocated for acquisition, we felt were very poorly spent.
Yeah, their South American literature collection is great.
Yes,
The
yes.
Chicano one is slowly
Right. Well, they were afraid of the Chicano because, you see, we still had to go through the purchasing agent of the local library.
And it was hard then because there weren't bibliographies.
No. No, right. And so they made trips down to South America and to Spain to buy the books. Whereas if they had set up a local community purchasing committee, we could have gotten, I think, together enough people knowledgeable that we could have given them long list, especially the professors and so forth. But we had to buck the, you know, the bureaucracy there, and they wanted to fail safe if they were going to fail at all. See, they very conservative, like you mentioned, very. Even though this was not money coming out of the community, it was coming from the federal government through the state library services department. They erred on the side of conservatism. But the project got going, and I think that after there was more community input, they got more Chicano material in there. Are there any other points that you want to raise? Or?
I'm sure that a lot of them, usually when we close, a lot of them get up and here they come with their questions. You probably won't get them on tape. So, I mean, feel free, unless you're really cramped for time, Bert.
No, it's 2 o'clock, is it? Yeah, I got it.
People may have some questions you want to ask him.
Sure. Yes.
What do you think our role should be as Chicano librarians? How do you think we could best be effective? You know, like you were saying, I believe, about proposals.
Yeah. Well, I think we have so little that we're going to have to go through a stage or through an epoch or through an era of demanding more resources rather than concentrating on training personnel. Because there's 2 ways for an underdeveloped people to become developed. One is you go the long, slow road of training, becoming technicians for the operation. Hi. You become the clerks first, and then you become the secretaries, and you go on up like that, you know. And a good example is India. India was under British colonial rule for what, over 150 years, you know, and they still aren't developed. Another example is a country like Cuba that's been on its own now for 11 or 12 years, and they telescoped this whole process by putting people in charge and by demanding that the main resources be used. So I'm not saying that you should not demand proficiency and training programs to develop personnel. I think that's very important. But equally important is that you band yourselves however way you are able to and demand more resources, that more resources be made available, which is in project writing and proposal writing, and that you give this as much emphasis as you are giving to the whole question of training Chicano librarians and fighting for the right kind of training, everything that is involved in training. That maybe you need compensatory treatment, and maybe you need compensatory admissions and qualifications, guidelines, for Chicanos to come in. However, you may have to deal with the problem of not getting enough or not keeping enough people in school. That's very important. But I think that equally as important is to go out after the resources. That somebody be given a year off to tour libraries all over the country, or to go all over the world, to go into Mexico and Spain, Latin America, and find out, if they have material on us. And that's what they do in some of these schools. They get grants, from Carnegie, from Ford, to do a doctor's degree or to do a master's degree. You get 2 years off, and that's what it is. You go visit all the libraries throughout the world or in this country and bring back the material, give the report. That some people be given a year off just to write proposals about how to get more funds so that you can acquire material and equipment and so forth. Unless you have an ongoing pressure component functioning here all the time for resources, you're going to remain just clerks and just a few guys and gals getting trained, and that's all. And you will be used and absorbed into the system rather than developing your own component. See, the black community is doing this, Of course, they've had a long history with their colleges in acquisition and preserving. That's why they have so much going for them, because you can go to many of the universities and colleges that are originally for black students only, and they have accumulated material. They can trace their history and so on and so forth, and they can provide also outlets for authors and for publishing and so forth. How do you, another thing that this component could do is how do you initiate acquisition programs in other libraries? You know, how do you get into it? Is there a journal, a professional journal? Do you get articles in there? Do they ever write about you? Huh? See, we got to get into.
The California librarian had a series on Chicano librarians.
One issue.
It was one.
Just one issue, but of course we have to keep pushing that.
Yes. Yes.
I'm interested in this acquisition of material in the Southwest that you were speaking about. Maybe you mentioned it before.
The Western Americana collection at Yale.
Yeah, I heard Vine Denoria this summer at ALA,
Uh-huh.
and he said that in New Mexico, some governor's son rounded up a whole lot of state documents and land papers and sold them
To
to the
them.
university.
Well, that's what I was, before you came, we were talking about this.
Oh, and I just wonder, where do you think, besides the universities who are buying these things for research, do you think maybe railroads have bought up these papers?
Yes. Yes. Well, no. I think that you have to go, we were talking about this period, 1835, 140 years ago. I think you have to go to the mining companies, the railroads, the sugar beet companies, and the commissaries, like the Threlkeld commissary that still operates. And I think some of the family is still alive and lives in Berkeley, the Threlkeld family. I think you have to go to the Hearst people. They had newspapers all in through there, and many of the other old newspaper chains. But the old companies operating in the West and Southwest, lumber companies, logging companies, the old Westwood Lumber Company and Red River Lumber Company in Northern California, Weyerhaeuser and other big lumbering companies, they must have records of the camps that they operated and the people and what took place, who took part, and so forth, or strikes, or the history of their operations. But even if you could get a grant to one student to go to Yale just to make a review of what is there in the Western Americana collection.
Do you think the company systematically destroyed the records, or do you think they kept them?
No, I think that for the most part they kept them. And not long ago I ran into a friend who was born in Shafter, Texas. It's a ghost town now. It's an old mining town. And we were just kidding about Shafter and so forth, because she said she'd gone back to see the town where she was born, and she said, I went to the town and it's buttoned down, it's closed down, but the company name is still on there, and it says, no trespassing and so forth. And I went to the company store, and there in the main drawer is a company book, and I looked in the years when we were there, and it showed what my father and mother used to buy, how much flour and how much sugar and so forth, how much they owed the company and how much they were drawing and so forth. See? So I think it's a haphazard thing with them. Some keep them and some don't. For the most part, the railroad companies now are very aware about keeping them, because these records are the only record that they have for pensions and for citizenship and for birth, proof and so forth. But it seems to me that would be a more costly operation. I think you could concentrate getting the information if you could just send some people to the libraries that already have the collections, or get some money for microfilming. Do they do that here in this library? They haven't instituted a microfilm program.
We buy things that are already microfilmed, like periodicals, but we don't have good enough.
Yes.
And, that might be something to request.
Mm-hmm. Another thing that I want to tell you about the libraries, I was in Mexico last November and ran into a couple. The young man was a teacher at the University of Mexico, and he was an editor of a radical monthly paper. And he took me to his house and to meet his wife and family, and his wife was very frail and sickly. And She couldn't cook dinner, so he invited us to his mother-in-law's place to eat. And on the way, I asked him, well, what's wrong with your wife? And he says, she has typhus. I says, typhus? He said, yes. He said, she picked it up. She is an archivist. That's another profession that they have. I don't know if they have that profession here. But in Mexico and Latin America, they have an archivist. And she was working on the archives of dating from 1538 to 1580. And she picked it up there. It's a spore. You know, and it's unknown. And several of them got it, 3 or 4 of the people. And they were treating it with penicillin and antibiotics. But this is a disease that hasn't existed for 300 years. And she picked up, can you imagine that? So when you're fooling around with very old documents, you know, that's a occupational hazard, huh? Yeah. But she told me about her work, and they were going through these documents about that period, and she found them extremely interesting, you know, to dig through all this. Of course, I don't know how many of you have seen the National Archives in Mexico. It's a historical monument. The building itself is sunk, I think, 13 feet, isn't it, something like that, you know, and you go in like in a cathedral, and it's wide open. And you just go into aisles, and you can finger all the documents are all coming apart. It's really a shame, but they still haven't encased them in preservative papers. You know, these huge, big. When they archived in those days, they just put it onto other sheets of paper and bound them. And you can see them. Tijuana had a National Geographic Society archive center there, right next to the bus station, and I don't know what happened to it, but they had very old documents dating back to the first settlers in Baja California. They had all the old maps and everything else. Believe it or not, in the Spanish tradition, there exists this whole tendency to collect and gather and to keep. You know, so that's why I made the point about the collection at Yale, that I'm sure you'd find an awful lot of material there. Especially about areas that we know so very little about, because they took everything. They bought everything. We were talking about what happened in that period between 1835 and the present time. In some parts of the Southwest, all the records are gone. You know, even of existing towns, all the records were gone. And so before you came in, I mentioned that the Western Americana collection at Yale had been systematically buying up all these records from company stores, the commissaries, railroads, and so forth. But not only buying them out of Texas and the Southwest, but going into Mexico and buying all the records. You know, and I'm sure that is being done without